TIGTech is a research and consultation project. It was kindly funded by the Fraunhofer Group, which I think many of you will know is Europe's largest applied sciences research group, and Ralph Linder is on there, who is part of the TIGTech team at Fraunhofer ISI, the Institute of Systems Innovation Research. And I think Tanya is on here too. Hello, Tanya. They are our academic partners. So TIGTech really was a sort of civil society, business and academic partnership. And we're also supported kindly by the World Economic Forum. Thank you very much, Tom, for that, which they didn't give us any money as Fraunhofer was the funder. It means that I can just waft around saying World Economic Forum, which unless you think that crown swabs and evil overlord about to take over the world is generally considered quite a good thing. And the concept, this idea that Konrad von Kammacher, my sort of co-founder, had was this vision that the governance of technology, not the technologies themselves, but the governance of the technologies in their own right should seek to earn societal trust. And we got together at this World Economic Forum Global Futures Council and batted this around with a few people and got our funding from Fraunhofer. And off we went. And I think I'm just going to share the slides from here now. I think what was interesting, play from start and share slides. Let me just do this. No multitasking here, working very well. Okay, and we'll get rid of that. So, can you see my slides, people here? Okay, Sam's nodding. So, let me just give you our approach. This was our starting point with this, which was, I think, ambitious is the euphemism I'm going to use. So we decided to take a helicopter view of trust from psychology, from behavioral science, from sociology, from responsible research and innovation. And this, you know, from my point of view, was a very, very confusing first 8 months. I remember sending this email to the team about 8 months in saying, oh my God, it's not me that's going mad. They don't agree. And there was such a melee of different ideas about trust. The behavioral science folks often think it's about heuristics and biases. The psychology people have their own different views about what trust is and what isn't. And it took a little bit of sorting out to try and distill this into a sort of an understanding about trust, and then applying that to technology governance and real world practice, and then distilling that to practical ideas to help those in tech governance to earn trust. I spoke to another academic who said, you know, Hilary, that's a research question that we would recommend nobody took on anything that broad as that, which I was beginning, I think Ralph and Tanya are the same, we're beginning to question that at some point ourselves. So let's have a look. I'm going to start, I'm going to do two things today. I'm going to look about avoiding distrust, and then I'm just going to run through 4 sort of light bulb moments. It's a really complex area, and it's been really hard to distill. But for me, there were real pop-out moments that about trust and about tech and about governance that really, really stick in my mind. I'd just like to share those with you now. So avoiding distrust. So, you know, we looked at that, and I'm going to use here, because it's top of mind for all of us, I think, this idea of the governance needing to earn trust as much as the technology itself. So here I'm using the approval process for the COVID vaccines, because for us, the approval process of the COVID vaccines, the trust in that is as important as the trust in the science behind it. So distrust creeps in when governance seems to be letting making money or political capital take priority over people and planet. So you see with COVID, with extreme measures of Trump, but I think in the UK here, there's been some disquiet. Is this about political capital speeding ahead the approval process? Is it about making money? And there is concern there that these priorities are taking over the public interest priority. But also particularly distrust creeping in because it's very difficult to handle the ethics and values issues very effectively. And it's not an area in many ways that the governance of technology has been set up to handle in the past. It's much more complicated than health and safety risk or toxicology or some of those more traditional approaches that governance institutions and regulators have been set up to handle. And some of these ethical and values issues are pretty tricky. And here, of course, for COVID, who's going to get it? What about, all of the balance of the different vaccines themselves? But also governance appears detached from what really happens. Now, perhaps less so more here, but I don't know if Roger Miles is on, but there's a lot of work being done showing how governance design is very detached from the way people work, the way the world works, the way companies work. But also that institutions themselves seem quite aloof, sometimes secretive, but also quite difficult and understand and opaque. And I'll come to later that this perhaps could change if trust is an important component for those organizations. So here's some light bulb moments. So when Conrad came to me with this idea that trust in the governance is important, I sort of said, yeah, that's really quite interesting. But it wasn't until I really started to look into this, I thought, actually, trust in governance makes the world go round, not just trust. So if we think of all those trust decisions that we make every day, whether to buy something, to download something, to vote for somebody, if you look at all those multiple choices that we make every single day, trust in the governance is part of a crazy number of those things. We are trusting that Michelle and the Food Standards Agency have got their governance sorted, and we can buy our food safe in the knowledge that it's not going to poison us. But that was really quite a resonance, just how much trust we're giving in governance, not just general societal trust. But also some say too much trust. Now, I'm having some really interesting conversations at the moment, perhaps in the cyber area and the digital area. It's seen as sort of a mantra in a lot of areas. We need to increase public trust. But actually, what if there's too much trust? Perhaps the cyber area is saying, and some of the digital areas, we're trusting governance, we're trusting company governance too much. But then what of that sort of equation, when is, people saying that public should take more responsibility, they trust too much, when is that lack of responsibility from those in governance and companies? And this is a conversation that has been going round and round in the work that I've been doing at the moment. My second light bulb moment was, of course, Baroness Honora O'Neill's quite well-known quote, certainly in the UK, which is first be trustworthy and then provide evidence that you are trustworthy. This is what trust is all about. Now, I'm not going here into what is trustworthy governance at the moment. We've done a lot of work about that. We're still wrestling with that. But I just want to highlight today these concepts of good evidence that you're trustworthy. Because one of the projects we were looking at and analysing all sorts of different citizens' dialogues and looking for where their relationship with governance and what they feel is important for trust from their point of view. So citizens trust governance most when they can see that it's working, which is obviously natural, you would expect. Standing up for the public interest, particularly laws created and enforced and breaches penalised. These very much are the traditional sort of belief in what governance is all about. Sometimes it actually isn't about that. Sometimes it's about shepherding innovation in different ways. Sometimes, particularly with these new digital, the new digital world, these sort of soft law or perhaps more self-regulatory approaches, they're not about, the iron fist of governance. And so again, I think there's an interesting area of work there about how those sorts of soft law approaches think about the impact of their governance in action. It's almost not, we're on the ethical AI committee. Well, that's okay, but what are you going to be doing about that? And I think citizens will be wanting to see more about that. I certainly hear it in my world. And I really like this quote from PA Consulting's really excellent report called Rethinking Regulation. Governance is changing. Regulators are seeing from not watchdogs of industry, which is a sort of finger-wagging thing focused on constraint and enforcement, but actually champions of the public. And that opens up a different sort of role for governance in some ways, something that Michelle, I think, knows very well. But this also opens up ideas of new competencies. So we're looking here at the engagement of stakeholders. Stakeholders are engaged in governance in three different ways: through communication, through, how they are listened to, and how they are co-create with governance designers. So the 3 competencies that we're looking at here, which is a new approach to communications. Regulators in particular really need to be out there more, to be demonstrating that they are really have the public interest in mind in action. And we see this at the moment from the Competitions and Markets Authority in the UK trying to take on the tech companies. They're really doing an interesting and good job with that. Innovation in the involvement of citizens. Now, this is a really key part of that. No, I won't. I'm coming to that in a minute. But also building trusted environments. And I know people from RIVM are on here. If we're having this more collaborative governance approach, where different stakeholders are working together to design governance, to design ethical and values-based regulatory approaches, this can't be done with people sitting in Whitehall, sitting in different regulatory environments on their own. It's increasingly about a more collaborative approach. Collaborative that obviously doesn't, in its own right, prevent sort of capture by vested interests and by the loudest voices making, steering governance design. But this idea of a trusted environment where it can be done fairly and collaboratively. Now, the third big light bulb moment for me actually was this one about trusting people makes them more likely to be trustworthy and trust you back. So trusting people first, and the governance of Taiwan is taking this really on board. And regulators who trust people they're regulating are more likely to evoke trustworthy behavior and compliance. And that's, governance is all about, if you are bad, and if you don't do it this way, then, it's about distrust. It's about, we don't trust you, so we are regulating you. But this is a huge thing in the trust area. This is very much one of the pivotal focus of earning trust and being trustworthy. But it opens up all sorts of really interesting new challenges for governance. Governance as if people can be trusted. Fascinating area. And the 7 drivers of trust are key. So in all that melee of, trust is this, trust is that, which really did my head in, then this consensus emerged. Actually, the drivers of trust, the things that make us trust individuals, organizations, each other, these are psychological factors, these are sociological factors. The evolutionary biologists and psychologists and the behavioral scientists and coalesced on this idea that there are these 7 drivers of trust. We can pick, take some out and pull some in, but really these are core. So the intent, if your intent, and in our terms, the intent here is the public interest, is upheld through process, delivery, and outcomes. Public interest helps navigate this really complex terrain of trade-offs, different stakeholder voices, different perspectives, different values and ethical decisions. And only the public interest really gives you that guide rail and compass. And competence. So there's a great quote from the OECD, you can be, if your heart's in the right place, that's great. But if you're incompetent, well, that it's not really going to work and you can't be trusted. And we're finding that in the UK with our COVID response as well. So again, the qualities of competence are effectiveness, reliability, consistency, responsiveness. There are qualities of competence that make us trust that competence more. And respect. So, honestly, respect, when I started this, respect means, you're going to be, respect your elders, Hillary. That's what parents used to say. And, respect for me was all about that. But I really got to think and sort of understand more about how important respect is. In fact, you can almost take all of those away and think about respect. Seeing others as equals, listening to and taking seriously concerns. I mean, if I had to say one of the most important findings of the TIGTech project, it is this concept of listening and taking seriously the concerns of people, particularly actually those people whose opinion you don't really value, who you don't really think may have got a point. Time and time again, from even the late lessons from early warnings report from the Environment Agency, the European Environment Agency, to all sorts of governance disasters, somebody somewhere has been saying, no, really, you really need to listen to this, and they've been ignored. This is probably the most important finding. Openness, as we see again, openness, it's common sense. Of course, you need to be open, but somehow we just don't do that. Somehow we're not practicing openness and transparency in many ways in order to earn and build trust as actually would be possible. And I think Michelle really has taken that to really interesting levels with the Food Standards Agency. And fairness, very interesting how if the process is fair and the procedural justice principles of fairness, which are very much like these drivers of trust, people will trust the process. They will take on board even things that are penalizing them, even things that don't go their way or they don't even agree with. If the process is fair, then people will feel that the outcome is fair. And integrity, again, very important actually for governance. This idea that, and it's a broad brush integrity here, about being accountable, being impartial and independent of vested interests. And we don't just mean business there, we mean loud voices of all sorts of different types, political interests, NGO voices, bringing that integrity to the process. And the last, but sort of not least in a way, is this idea of inclusion, of including and involving others. And I think part of that inclusion process, including citizens, involving citizens, really is important in terms of earning the whole trust in the governance process. And I've got to get going. So I want to just tell you, we talked about common, is this common sense? This is all common sense, these trust drivers, openness, we all know that, we just know that, but yet we really don't do it as much as we individually would like to do it. It feels scary. So I just wanted to think about, wasn't a full part of the research, but what gets in the way? And there are three really key things. What gets in the way of embedding these trust drivers and really bringing them to life? So assumptions, honestly, when I looked into assumptions, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. It won't happen that way. We just assume, and this is all of us, we all have our little own assumptions, beliefs, and little sort of bubble of thoughts. And it's breaking through those assumptions, I think, that really makes a big difference. And my old school teacher, when I was little, used to say, Hilary, do not assume. Assume makes an ass of you and me. And I think she was right. And incentives, we won't go into that here, but there are so many incentives that are, really acting against this concept of responsible governance, responsible innovation. But actually, really importantly, distance. A lot of the time I was reading really interesting areas of governance designed detached from the people they're governing, detached from the outcomes, detached from the citizens, and detached from the whole process. And technology is detaching us all from each other. And those three things were really the keys to how governance can earn trust, by thinking about those things, by stepping out, using the trust drivers as the drivers to earn trust in their governance. So I think, in theory, I'm going to be finished there.